My name's Carson, and for the last 10 years, I thought I had the perfect life. I'm married to Vanessa, and we have a sweet little girl named Mia. We live in a charming town where everyone knows each other, and for a while, I thought we had it all. But sometimes the biggest storms come without warning. Vanessa and I met in the most unexpected way, at a charity auction of all places. She was there, dazzling everyone with her wit and charm, and somehow, I ended up buying a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine just to impress her. That night we talked for hours, and I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. Fast forward to a few months ago, and things started to feel off. Vanessa began working late more frequently, claiming she had endless projects at her marketing job. At first I didn't question it. She's always been ambitious. But then there were the late-night texts and calls, and the way she'd suddenly become secretive with her phone. It gnawed at me. One night, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked our phone bill. That's when I saw his name, Aiden. Aiden, my best friend since high school, the guy who stood by my side at our wedding. Seeing his name repeatedly on Vanessa's call log felt like a punch to the gut. I knew something wasn't right. When I confronted Vanessa, she laughed it off, saying they were planning a surprise for my birthday. But her laugh was hollow, and she couldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to believe her so badly, but deep down, I knew she was lying. I'm here to share my story, because what I discovered next shattered my world. If you think you know betrayal, you haven't heard my story yet. After confronting Vanessa and receiving her half-hearted excuses, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The idea that my best friend Aiden could be involved made it even worse. I decided to dig deeper, needing proof to confirm my worst fears. A few days later, Vanessa mentioned she'd be working late again. My mind was racing with all the possible scenarios. I needed to know the truth, so I took a half-day off from work without telling anyone. I drove to Vanessa's office, parked a few blocks away, and waited. Hours passed, and I was beginning to doubt myself. Maybe I was overreacting. But then, around 7 p.m., I saw Vanessa walking out of the office building. She wasn't alone. There, with his arm around her waist, was Aiden. My heart sank as I watched them get into his car and drive away. I followed them at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they turned white. They drove to a cozy little restaurant on the outskirts of town. It was a place we used to go to for special occasions. Watching them walk in together, laughing and looking every bit like a couple, made my blood boil. I parked and sat there trying to process what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them right then and there, but I knew I needed to keep my cool. I needed more evidence. After what felt like an eternity, they finally left the restaurant. I followed them again, this time to a nearby hotel. When they disappeared inside, my world crumbled. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there it was. Irrefutable proof that my wife and my best friend were having an affair. I sat in my car feeling numb. Anger, betrayal, and sadness washed over me in waves. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. I needed a plan. I drove home trying to gather my thoughts. I had to keep it together for Mia's sake. She was already asleep when I got back, and I stood by her bed watching her sleep peacefully, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. I knew I had to protect her from this mess, no matter what. The next morning, Vanessa acted as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shattered our lives the night before. Watching her lie so effortlessly made my blood boil, but I played along, pretending I knew nothing. I needed more time to figure out my next move. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this and decide what to do. Now, I need to keep my cool and gather more evidence. After discovering Vanessa and Aiden's affair, I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I needed a plan to confront them, but I wanted to be smart about it. I spent the next few days acting as normal as possible around Vanessa. It was torture, pretending everything was fine when I knew the truth. Every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. But I had to bide my time. I decided the best way to confront them was to catch them in the act, so there would be no room for lies or excuses. I kept a close eye on Vanessa's behavior and her messages, waiting for the next opportunity. It didn't take long. One Friday evening, she told me she had another late meeting at work. My heart sank, but I kept my composure and told her I'd take care of Mia. After Vanessa left, I called my sister Emily and asked her to come over and watch Mia. I didn't give her the details, just told her it was important. Once Emily arrived, I kissed Mia goodnight and drove to the hotel where I'd seen Vanessa and Aiden before. I parked a short distance away and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, Aiden's car pulled into the lot. I watched them go inside, hand in hand, and my blood boiled. This was it. I waited another 20 minutes before heading inside. My heart was pounding as I walked up to the front desk. I asked the clerk for a room key, using an excuse about surprising my wife who had checked in earlier. To my relief, the clerk handed over a key without much fuss. I found their room and stood outside the door for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking as I slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. Vanessa and Aiden were tangled up in the sheets, too engrossed in each other to notice me at first. When they finally saw me standing there, the look of shock on their faces was priceless. "Carson!" Vanessa screamed, scrambling to cover herself. "What are you doing here?" Aiden jumped out of bed, looking equally stunned. "Dude, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered. I laughed bitterly. "Really, Aiden? Because it looks exactly like what it is. My wife and my best friend screwing each other behind my back." Vanessa started crying, but I couldn't tell if they were real tears or just an act. "I'm sorry, Carson, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened." "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "How long has this been going on?" She looked at Aiden, then back at me. "A few months." "A few months?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You've been lying to me for months, both of you." Aiden tried to step forward, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't. Just don't. I trusted you, man. You were like a brother to me." He hung his head, unable to meet my gaze. Vanessa continued to cry, but I felt no sympathy. "You both betrayed me in the worst possible way," I said. "And now you're going to face the consequences." I turned and walked out, leaving them to deal with the mess they'd created. I felt a mix of rage and relief. Relief that I finally had the truth, and rage at the destruction of my family. But this was only the beginning. There were still decisions to be made, and I knew the road ahead would be long and painful. After catching Vanessa and Aiden in the act, I felt like my entire world had crumbled. Confronting them was one thing, but dealing with the emotional aftermath was another beast entirely. Driving home that night, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I felt betrayed, angry, devastated. How could they do this to me, to our family? When I got home, I found Emily still there playing with Mia. I took a moment to compose myself before joining them. Emily could tell something was wrong. She gave me a concerned look, but I just shook my head. "Not now," I mouthed, glancing at Mia. She nodded, understanding that this wasn't the time for questions. After Mia went to bed, I finally broke down. I told Emily everything, how I'd suspected the affair, what I discovered, and the confrontation. She listened, her face growing more shocked with each passing detail. When I finished, she hugged me tightly, and I let myself cry. "You're going to get through this, Carson," she said, her voice firm. "You're stronger than you think." But in the days that followed, it didn't feel that way. I was a mess, barely able to function at work or at home. Every time I looked at Mia, my heart broke a little more. She deserved so much better than this chaos. Vanessa tried to reach out to me multiple times. She called, texted, even showed up at the house a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. Her apologies and excuses meant nothing to me. I needed space to process everything. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions I was experiencing. Dr. Peterson was a kind, middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor. In our first session, I poured my heart out, telling her everything from the beginning. "It's natural to feel this way, Carson," she said gently. "Betrayal is one of the hardest things to cope with, especially when it comes from those closest to us. But you need to focus on your healing for your sake and for Mia's." Talking to Dr. Peterson helped, but it was still an uphill battle. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake for hours, replaying every moment of my relationship with Vanessa, wondering what I'd missed. I kept thinking back to the early days, to that 4th of July when we first met, and all the memories we'd created since. It felt like my whole life had been a lie. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos. There was one from our wedding day, Vanessa in her white dress looking radiant, and Aiden standing beside me, both of us grinning like fools. The image now felt like a cruel joke. As I continued therapy, I slowly started to find some semblance of balance. I focused on being there for Mia, making sure she felt loved and secure despite the turmoil. I took her out for ice cream, played her favorite games, and read her bedtime stories. Her laughter became the only bright spot in my otherwise dark days. But even with these small moments of joy, the pain was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I knew the road to healing would be long and difficult, but I was determined to keep moving forward, one step at a time. After confronting Vanessa and Aiden and dealing with the emotional fallout, I realized there was no way I could ever forgive them. The betrayal was too deep, and the trust was irreparably shattered. I knew I had to end this toxic chapter of my life. After weeks of rage and therapy sessions with Dr. Peterson, I decided it was time to face Vanessa one last time. I needed to tell her exactly how I felt and make it clear that our marriage was over. One evening, after putting Mia to bed, I called Vanessa and asked her to come over. She arrived looking nervous and fragile, a stark contrast to the confident woman I once knew. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. "Carson, I'm so sorry," she began, tears already welling up in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you like this. I know I messed up, but I want to make things right." I felt the anger boiling inside me. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "Make things right?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "You think you can just apologize and everything will be okay? You destroyed our family, Vanessa. You betrayed me with my best friend." She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Carson. I know I hurt you. But please, let's try to fix this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I stood up, unable to contain my rage. "Fix this? There's no fixing this. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with Aiden behind my back. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To Mia?" "Carson, please," she sobbed. "I was lost. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I want to make things right for our family." I shook my head, feeling the finality of my decision settle in. "No, Vanessa, it's too late for that. I can't trust you anymore. I can't even stand to look at you. This marriage is over. I want a divorce." Her eyes widened in shock. "No, Carson, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, anything." I pointed toward the door, my voice cold and unwavering. "Get out, Vanessa. I don't want to hear any more of your lies. I'll talk to my lawyer and start the divorce proceedings. You need to find a place to stay." She stood up, her body shaking with sobs. "Please, Carson, don't do this. Think about Mia." "I am thinking about Mia," I said, my voice breaking. "She deserves better than this mess. She deserves parents who respect each other, not this sham of a marriage." Vanessa left, her cries echoing down the hallway. I stood there feeling a mix of relief and heartbreak. I knew this was the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer and started the process. It was a painful and messy ordeal, but I was determined to get through it for Mia's sake. I focused on being the best father I could be, making sure she felt loved and secure, despite the chaos around us. During this time, I continued therapy with Dr. Peterson, working through my anger and betrayal. I learned that healing would take time and that it was okay to feel hurt and angry. But I also knew I needed to move forward and build a new life for myself and Mia. As weeks turned into months, I began to find some semblance of peace. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the pain felt fresh. But I knew I was stronger than I had ever been before. After deciding to divorce Vanessa, I knew I couldn't just let her and Aiden get away with what they did. The betrayal cut too deep, and I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to pay the piper. First, I focused on Aiden. He'd been my best friend for years, and his betrayal felt like a knife in my back. I knew I had to hit him where it hurt the most, his career. Aiden worked as a high-level executive at a well-known company. He had a pristine reputation, but I knew some of his dirty secrets. I spent days gathering evidence of his indiscretions at work, things he'd confided in me over the years, thinking I'd never use them against him. Misuse of company funds, inappropriate relationships with subordinates, and other shady dealings. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it anonymously to his company's HR department and the CEO. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Aiden was called into a series of meetings, and his world started to unravel. I heard through mutual friends that he was placed on indefinite leave while an investigation was conducted. It was only a matter of time before he was fired, and his spotless reputation was left in tatters. Next, I turned my attention to Vanessa. I knew that simply divorcing her wasn't enough. She needed to understand the full impact of her actions. I made sure our divorce proceedings were as difficult as possible for her. I fought for full custody of Mia, and with the evidence of her affair, I had a strong case. I also pushed for a favorable division of our assets, leaving her with far less than she'd anticipated, but I didn't stop there. Vanessa had a lot of friends in our tight-knit community, many of whom admired her and thought she could do no wrong. I made sure they knew the truth. I discreetly shared the details of her affair with Aiden, making sure everyone understood the depth of her betrayal. It wasn't long before the whispers started, and her social standing began to crumble. The final blow came when I filed a restraining order against Aiden. I didn't want him anywhere near Mia or me. This added another layer of legal trouble for him, making his life even more difficult. One day, Vanessa showed up at the house looking distraught. She begged me to reconsider, to make things easier for her. "Carson, please," she pleaded. "I know I messed up, but do we really need to go through all this? Can't we find a way to be civil for Mia's sake?" Her words only fueled my anger. "You should have thought about Mia before you decided to cheat," I snapped. "You and Aiden deserve everything that's coming to you. You brought this on yourselves." Vanessa left in tears, but I felt no sympathy. My focus was on Mia and making sure she had the best possible life, despite the mess Vanessa had created. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Vanessa and Aiden's lives fell apart. Aiden lost his job and struggled to find new employment with the black mark on his record. Vanessa's friends turned their backs on her, and she found herself increasingly isolated. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding my life and being there for Mia. We started creating new memories together, and I made sure she felt loved and secure despite the turmoil around us. I know revenge isn't always the answer, but in this case, it felt like justice. They needed to face the consequences of their actions, and I needed to find a way to move forward. After seeking my revenge on Vanessa and Aiden, I found a strange sense of satisfaction. But life goes on, and I couldn't have navigated this mess alone. Let me tell you about the people who helped me through this ordeal. My support system. First and foremost, my sister Emily has been a rock. She's always been there for me, but she really stepped up during this crisis. After I told her about Vanessa's affair, she moved in with me temporarily to help take care of Mia. Emily has a natural gift with kids, and Mia adores her. Having Emily around made the transition a bit easier for Mia, and it gave me some much-needed breathing room to deal with everything. Then there's my friend Jake. He's the kind of guy who's always ready to lend a hand or crack a joke to lighten the mood. When I told him about Vanessa and Aiden, his first reaction was pure rage on my behalf. "That bastard," he muttered. "He's gonna get what's coming to him." Jake helped me gather the evidence I needed to take Aiden down. He even accompanied me to a few meetings with my lawyer to make sure I stayed focused and didn't let my emotions get the best of me. Speaking of my lawyer, Laura has been an absolute powerhouse. She came highly recommended by a mutual friend, and from our first meeting, I knew I was in good hands. Laura didn't just handle the legal aspects of my divorce, she became a confidant and advisor. She guided me through the process with a firm, yet compassionate approach, always keeping Mia's best interests at heart. Then there's Dr. Peterson, my therapist. She's helped me untangle the mess of emotions I've been dealing with. In our sessions, we've worked on strategies for managing my anger and grief, and she's helped me start the long process of healing. Dr. Peterson has also been great with Mia, offering family therapy sessions to help her process the changes in our lives. Mia's school counselor, Mrs. Jenkins, also deserves a mention. She's been incredibly supportive, checking in on Mia regularly and providing her with a safe space to talk about her feelings. Mrs. Jenkins has been a great ally in making sure Mia stays grounded and knows she's loved and supported. Lastly, I want to mention a new friend I've made, Mark. He's a fellow dad I met at one of Mia's school events. We got to talking and realized we had a lot in common, including going through rough divorces. Mark's been a great sounding board, offering advice and sharing his own experiences. It's been helpful to have someone who's been through a similar situation and come out the other side. These people have been my lifeline, helping me navigate the chaos and supporting me every step of the way. I'm grateful for each of them and the roles they've played in my journey. Today, I want to share some flashbacks to the happier times in my marriage with Vanessa. Looking back, it's painful to see how things changed. But these memories also remind me of why I fought so hard to save my family. One of my favorite memories is our honeymoon. Vanessa and I went to Hawaii, and it was nothing short of magical. We spent our days exploring the islands, snorkeling in crystal clear waters, and hiking through lush rainforests. At night, we'd sit on the beach, watching the sunset, talking about our future. Everything felt perfect. Vanessa was my best friend, my confidant, and my partner in adventure. I remember thinking I couldn't be happier. Another memory that stands out is the day Mia was born. It was a chaotic, beautiful day. Vanessa was incredible throughout the entire process. I was a nervous wreck, but she remained calm and focused. When Mia finally arrived, I felt a wave of emotions I can't even begin to describe. Holding our daughter for the first time, seeing Vanessa's exhausted but radiant smile, it was the best day of my life. We spent that night in the hospital, cradling Mia and dreaming about the future. We were a family, and it felt like nothing could ever tear us apart. There was also our 5th wedding anniversary. I had planned a surprise trip to the mountains. Vanessa had always talked about wanting to stay in a cabin, so I found the perfect spot. We spent the weekend hiking, roasting marshmallows by the fire, and just enjoying each other's company. On the last night, we sat outside under a blanket of stars, talking about how far we'd come and how excited we were for the years ahead. It felt like we were on top of the world, both literally and figuratively. As I sit here writing this, it's hard to reconcile those memories with the reality of what's happened. Vanessa wasn't always the person she became. There were so many moments filled with love, laughter, and genuine connection. I think that's part of what makes this betrayal so painful. It wasn't always bad. There were real beautiful moments that made me believe in our marriage and our future together. But even with these happy memories, I can't ignore the truth of what she did. It's like looking at a beautiful painting that's been slashed through the middle. The good times don't erase the betrayal. They just make it hurt more. They remind me of what I thought we had and how it all came crashing down. I've learned through therapy that it's okay to cherish these memories while still acknowledging the pain. They're part of my story, part of what shaped me. And while they make moving on more complicated, they also remind me of my capacity to love deeply and fully. Someday, I hope to find that kind of love again, with someone who truly deserves it. I want to talk about my therapy sessions. They've been a crucial part of my journey towards healing and understanding everything that's happened. After deciding to divorce Vanessa and executing my plan for revenge, I knew I needed to work on myself. The anger and betrayal were eating me alive, and I couldn't afford to let those emotions consume me, especially for Mia's sake. My therapist, Dr. Peterson, has been a guiding light through all of this. During our sessions, she's helped me unpack the layers of hurt and betrayal. She's taught me that it's okay to feel anger and sadness, but it's also important to find ways to process and move past those emotions. In our early sessions, I was mostly consumed by anger. I'd sit in her office venting about Vanessa and Aiden, feeling the rage bubble up inside me. Dr. Peterson listened patiently, never judging, but always gently guiding me towards a deeper understanding of my feelings. "Carson," she said during one session, "it's natural to feel anger and betrayal, but holding on to these emotions can be toxic. Let's work on finding ways to release them constructively." One exercise that helped was writing letters. Dr. Peterson suggested I write letters to Vanessa and Aiden, expressing everything I felt: anger, sadness, betrayal. But instead of sending them, I'd tear them up. It was a symbolic way of letting go of the pain they'd caused me. Surprisingly, it helped. Putting my feelings into words and then physically destroying them felt like a small step towards reclaiming my peace. Another pivotal moment in therapy was when we started focusing on my self-worth. The betrayal had shattered my confidence. I kept questioning myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't enough. Dr. Peterson worked with me to rebuild my self-esteem, reminding me that Vanessa's actions were a reflection of her choices, not my worth. "Carson, you are a loving father and a dedicated partner," she'd say. "Her betrayal doesn't define you. Let's work on finding your inner strength again." We also did a lot of work on mindfulness and stress relief. Dr. Peterson introduced me to meditation and breathing exercises. At first I was skeptical, but gradually these practices started to help. Taking a few minutes each day to focus on my breath, to clear my mind, became a refuge from the storm of emotions I was dealing with. Family therapy sessions with Mia were equally important. Dr. Peterson helped us navigate the changes in our lives, ensuring that Mia felt heard and supported. Mia was confused and hurt by the separation, but having a safe space to express her feelings made a big difference. We worked on building a new routine and finding ways to create happy moments together. One session in particular stands out. Mia asked, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" I looked at her, my heart breaking, and said, "Yes, sweetie, we're going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters most." These sessions have been a lifeline for both of us. They've given me the tools to cope with my emotions and to support Mia through this difficult time. I'm not going to lie, there are still days when the pain feels overwhelming. But therapy has taught me that it's okay to have bad days, as long as I keep moving forward. I want to talk about how everything that's happened has impacted my professional life. Balancing work and personal chaos has been one of the toughest challenges I've faced. When I first discovered Vanessa's affair, my work started to suffer. I was constantly distracted, replaying the betrayal over and over in my mind. I couldn't focus on my tasks and my productivity plummeted. I work in finance, a field where precision and attention to detail are crucial, and my performance was slipping. My boss, Mr. Hamilton, noticed the change in me. He called me into his office one afternoon. "Carson, is everything okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You haven't been yourself lately." I hesitated but decided to be honest. "Mr. Hamilton, I'm going through a tough time. My wife and I are getting a divorce, and it's been difficult." He nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry to hear that, Carson. If you need some time off to deal with things, we can arrange that. Your well-being is important." I was grateful for his understanding. I took a week off to focus on the divorce proceedings and to be there for Mia. During that time, I leaned heavily on Emily and Jake for support. They helped me keep things together at home so I could focus on work when I returned. When I went back to work, I made a conscious effort to separate my personal life from my professional responsibilities. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to step up for Mia. She needed stability, and part of providing that was maintaining my job and ensuring our financial security. I started going to the office earlier and staying later to catch up on the work I'd fallen behind on. I also set boundaries to keep my personal life from spilling over into my workday. I'd take a few minutes every hour to practice mindfulness exercises that Dr. Peterson had taught me. These little breaks helped clear my mind and refocus my energy. Despite my efforts, there were still tough days. Some days I'd receive a call from my lawyer or a message from Vanessa, and it would throw me off completely. But I kept pushing forward, knowing that I had to stay strong for Mia. One of the surprising positives from this period was the support I received from my colleagues. Many of them noticed the change in me and reached out. Some shared their own stories of going through tough times and offered advice and encouragement. It created a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't felt before. Another unexpected ally was Mark, the fellow dad I mentioned earlier. He worked in a different department, but reached out after hearing about my situation. We'd grab lunch together and talk about balancing work and personal struggles. His insights and support were invaluable. As I gradually regained my footing at work, I noticed something else. I became more empathetic towards my colleagues. I understood that everyone has their battles, often unseen, and I made an effort to be more supportive and understanding. This shift in perspective didn't just help me, it also strengthened my relationships at work. Balancing work and personal life remains a challenge, but I've learned to manage it better. I'm not perfect, and there are still days when the weight of everything feels overwhelming, but I've built a support system, and I've found ways to cope and keep moving forward. I want to talk about how the stress of everything that's happened has taken a toll on my health, both physically and mentally. It's been a rough road, but I'm doing my best to navigate it. After discovering Vanessa's affair and deciding to divorce her, I noticed that my stress levels skyrocketed. At first, I tried to power through it, thinking I could handle everything on my own. But it quickly became apparent that the stress was affecting me more than I realized. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and the upcoming legal battles. The lack of sleep made it hard to function during the day, and I found myself constantly exhausted. I tried over-the-counter sleep aids, but they only helped temporarily. Then, there were the headaches. They'd come out of nowhere, sharp and debilitating. I'd have to stop whatever I was doing and sit in a dark room until they passed. My appetite also took a hit. I either couldn't eat at all, or I'd binge on junk food, trying to find some comfort in the chaos. My weight fluctuated, and I started feeling more and more run down. Mentally, I was a mess. The constant anxiety and anger were overwhelming. I'd have moments of panic where I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in on me. Dr. Peterson diagnosed me with anxiety and depression, which wasn't surprising given everything that was happening. She recommended a combination of therapy and medication to help manage my symptoms. I was hesitant at first, especially about the medication. I didn't want to feel like I was relying on pills to get through the day, but after a particularly bad panic attack, I decided to give it a try. The medication helped stabilize my mood, but it wasn't a cure-all. I still had to put in the work in therapy. Dr. Peterson and I focused on developing coping mechanisms for my anxiety. She taught me techniques like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and visualization. These methods helped me manage the physical symptoms of anxiety, like the tightness in my chest and the racing heart. Exercise also became a crucial part of my routine. I started running in the mornings before work. At first, it was just a way to burn off the nervous energy, but it quickly became a form of therapy. The rhythm of my footsteps, the fresh air, and the sense of accomplishment after a run did wonders for my mental state. It gave me a break from my thoughts and a sense of control over something in my life. Despite all these efforts, there were still setbacks. I caught a nasty flu that knocked me out for a couple of weeks. My immune system was weakened by the constant stress, and it took longer than usual to recover. Emily and Jake stepped up during this time, helping with Mia and making sure things didn't fall apart while I was bedridden. As I slowly got back on my feet, I realized the importance of self-care. I couldn't be the father Mia needed if I didn't take care of myself first. It was a hard lesson to learn, but an essential one. I started paying more attention to my diet, cutting out junk food and focusing on nutritious meals. I made sleep a priority, creating a bedtime routine that helped me unwind and get the rest I desperately needed. Through it all, Mia has been my anchor. Her smiles, her laughter, and her unwavering love remind me of what's truly important. She gives me the strength to keep pushing forward, even on the toughest days. I want to talk about the financial strain that came with the divorce and how I've been managing it. It's been a tough road, but I'm learning to navigate the challenges. Divorce is expensive. Between the lawyer fees, court costs, and dividing our assets, my finances took a serious hit. I was already dealing with the emotional fallout, and the added financial stress felt like an extra weight on my shoulders. One of the first major expenses was finding a new place for Vanessa to live. Since I got to keep the house, she had to move out. She ended up renting an apartment nearby so she could still see Mia during her supervised visitation. But this meant we had to split our savings to cover her new living expenses, and that drained a significant portion of our funds. Then there were the ongoing costs of the divorce proceedings. Laura, my lawyer, was worth every penny, but her services weren't cheap. The legal fees kept adding up, and every new development in the case seemed to require another expensive consultation or court appearance. On top of that, I had to manage the day-to-day expenses of raising Mia. Being a single parent is costly. There's childcare, school supplies, extracurricular activities, and just the general cost of providing for a growing child. Emily and Jake helped out as much as they could, but I still felt the strain. To make matters worse, Vanessa's financial situation was unstable. Her job in marketing paid well, but her spending habits were another story. She had racked up a significant amount of debt, and when we divided our assets, I ended up taking on a portion of that debt to help her get back on her feet. It wasn't fair, but I didn't want Mia to suffer because her mother couldn't manage her finances. Realizing I needed to take control of my financial situation, I sat down and created a strict budget. I cut out all non-essential expenses and focused on paying down debt and building up my savings. I also met with a financial advisor to get a clear picture of my financial health and to create a plan for the future. One of the most challenging aspects was adjusting my lifestyle. I had to let go of some luxuries and find more economical ways to live. I started cooking at home more often instead of eating out, canceled unnecessary subscriptions, and found cheaper alternatives for entertainment. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I also picked up a side gig to bring in some extra income. I started freelancing in the evenings, using my skills in finance to help small businesses with their bookkeeping and financial planning. It was tiring, especially on top of my full-time job and parenting duties, but it provided a much-needed financial cushion. Despite the financial strain, I made sure Mia never felt the impact. I wanted her life to remain as stable and happy as possible. I kept up with her favorite activities, like dance classes and weekend outings, finding creative ways to cut costs without cutting corners on her happiness. One of the hardest parts was explaining to Mia why we couldn't do some of the things we used to. She didn't understand why we had to be more careful with money now. I did my best to explain it in a way she could grasp, reassuring her that no matter what, she was loved and taken care of. Over time, I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The financial strain was still there, but I was managing it better. I learned the importance of planning, budgeting, and making smart financial decisions. Most importantly, I realized that even in tough times, we can find ways to adapt and thrive. This will be my final update. After everything that's happened, I want to share what I've learned from this journey and offer some advice to anyone going through something similar. When I first discovered Vanessa's affair, my world shattered. I felt betrayed, angry, and lost. But through the pain and chaos, I found strength I didn't know I had. I learned that healing is a long and difficult process, but it's possible if you take it one step at a time. Here are a few key things I've learned. Embrace your emotions. It's okay to feel hurt, angry, and sad. Don't try to suppress your emotions. Allow yourself to feel them fully, and then find healthy ways to process them. Therapy was crucial for me, and it can be for you too. Lean on your support system. Don't go through this alone. Friends, family, and professionals can provide invaluable support. Emily, Jake, and Mark were my rocks, and I couldn't have made it without them. Focus on self-care. Take care of yourself physically and mentally. Exercise, eat well, and find activities that bring you joy. These small steps can make a big difference in your overall well-being. Prioritize your children. If you have kids, their well-being should be your top priority. Create a stable and loving environment for them, and make sure they know they are loved and supported. Forgive for your own peace. Forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It took me a long time to forgive Vanessa and Aiden, but when I did, it felt like a weight had been lifted. Rediscover yourself. Take this opportunity to reconnect with who you are outside of your relationships. Pursue hobbies, set new goals, and explore new interests. This journey is as much about finding yourself as it is about moving on from the past. Look to the future. The past is behind you, and while it's important to acknowledge it, don't let it define your future. Focus on building a life that makes you happy and fulfilled. To anyone going through a similar experience, know that you're not alone. It may feel like the end of the world, but it's also the beginning of a new chapter. Take it one day at a time and trust that things will get better. Take care, everyone.